Nero Wolfe and the Wine Pairing That Didn't Pair, a Nero Wolfe story. If there's one thing you don't mess with in the Wolfe household, aside from the thermostat, the daily orchid schedule, or Fritz's sauce ratios, it's the wine. Specifically, wine intended for Nero Wolfe's personal consumption, selected with priest-like reverence and slotted into the weekly rotation as rigidly as the New York State tax code. So when someone brought a bottle that wasn't on Fritz's log, paired it with lamb, and claimed it had Wolfe's approval, I knew something was off. Wolfe doesn't improvise. He tolerates improvisation even less than people. It began, as these things often do, with a woman at the door. She wasn't the storm-in type, which is always more alarming. Blonde in a winter grey way, business casual coat, no dramatic lipstick, no fluttering. Just composed, measured. She asked for Wolfe by name, not title, said she had a personal culinary concern, and pronounced Gewürztraminer like someone who's corrected sommeliers. Wolfe was in the plant room, halfway through his noon orchid inspection, which meant she had 26 minutes to kill. She declined coffee, asked for seltzer, and sipped it like it was something she'd been told not to enjoy. Name: Olivia Harrow. Profession: food and wine critic for Epicure and Vine, some glossy rag that shows up in Wolfe's mail pile once a month and usually gets ignored unless it misuses a French culinary term, in which case he circles it in red ink and mails it back. She didn't mention that. I escorted her into the office precisely as Wolfe entered, robes swishing and scowl calibrated for general use. Olivia stood, uninvited. Wolfe sat, predictably. I stayed somewhere in between. "My concern is simple," she said, folding her gloves like they were going to be interrogated later. "Last week a piece ran online. Not by me. It bore my name. A critique of a private dinner pairing hosted by Lionel Birch. It said the duck confit was desecrated by an overwrought Sangiovese." Wolfe arched one eyebrow, which for him is a standing ovation. "You object to the opinion?" "I object to the pairing, yes, but more so to the article. I didn't write it." "Ah," Wolfe said, which I knew meant I now pretend to understand enough to stay silent while I listen longer. Olivia continued. "Worse, the pairing they described? I never attended such a dinner. The event is real. The review is fake. The fallout has already begun. Lionel Birch has pulled sponsorship. My editor has been re-evaluating brand identity. And someone is leveraging the confusion." Wolfe, who had reached for a beer before she arrived, now let it rest on the desk. That, in case you're wondering, is Wolfe's version of leaning forward with interest. "And what," Wolfe said finally, "compels you to believe this is not simply a case of stolen identity? A rogue intern with login access? A spat among the editorial vermin?" "I received a note," she said, removing a small envelope from her bag, the kind that smells faintly of cardstock and cologne. It said, "Next time, don't correct the pour." That phrase means nothing to you, but it means everything to me. It refers to a dinner I actually did attend 2 months ago. I corrected a sommelier, privately. I didn't tell anyone. I reached out. She let me take the note. The handwriting was elegant, old school, like the kind you'd use to shame someone while being polite about it. I held it up to Wolfe. He nodded. That was permission to place it in his inbox rather than his ashtray. "So," Olivia said, tone still cool but cracking at the corners, "someone is impersonating me. They're using privileged details, and they're doing it with the intent to sabotage me professionally. I've been told you don't leave this house for anything less than murder. So tell me, how do you feel about character assassination?" Wolfe closed his eyes. That's his version of closing a file drawer in his brain. "Do you recall what was served with the lamb?" he asked. She blinked. "At the Birch dinner." "Number, at the dinner where you corrected the pour." She hesitated, then, "A 2003 Vosne Romanée, Domaine Leroy. They poured too warm. I asked for a chilled glass. The sommelier looked like he'd been slapped." Wolfe exhaled like someone finally turned the page on a slow novel. "You were correct," he said. "That vintage collapses above 64 degrees. So, someone objects to your correction and is trying to ruin me for it. Pfui, an amateur's revenge." Olivia stood, more abrupt than she meant to. "So you won't take it?" "I didn't say that." Wolfe's eyes opened again. "Archie will take your particulars." And that, ladies and gentlemen, was how the wine critic left with the faintest grin. Wolfe resumed his beer, and I got stuck sorting through a mess involving ego, tannins, and what would turn out to be the most passive-aggressive crime we'd seen in years. What Wolfe saw in it, I didn't yet know, but he already knew who he needed to annoy next. The real trouble began the next morning, which in Wolfe's terms means shortly after 11 a.m. He had just completed his post-orchid recovery, a period I've learned to navigate the way archaeologists tiptoe around ancient burial sites, when Fritz came into the office uninvited. That alone was enough to draw Wolfe's glare from his morning paper. Fritz doesn't barge unless something is either burning, missing, or inedible. He stood at the door, twisting a kitchen towel between his hands like it owed him rent. "I didn't touch the cellar," he said. Wolfe lowered the paper 1 inch, which in Wolfe's world is a full gasp. "You didn't what?" "I didn't open the Barolo," Fritz clarified. "The 2006 Giacomo Conterno. It's missing. The bottle, the one you'd reserved for Friday's osso buco." There are few things that make Wolfe physically shift in his chair. That sentence, it did the trick. His shoulders moved. His paper folded, deliberately. He looked at Fritz like the man had just claimed responsibility for rearranging the orchid room alphabetically. "You're certain," Wolfe said. "As certain as I am of salt," Fritz replied, which, coming from him, was practically a blood oath. Wolfe glanced at me, then at the globe. The wine ledger sat beside it, naturally. I opened it without being asked. The bottle had indeed been noted, initialed in Wolfe's own cryptic shorthand for reserved, dated, and with a flourish that implied no one under the roof should touch it under threat of expulsion or death. "Archie," Wolfe said, "the inventory." It wasn't a request. I headed down to the cellar, muttering under my breath about amateur burglars with expensive taste. The basement racks were, as usual, in Swiss military formation. The Conterno slot was empty. Not dusty empty, recently disturbed empty, which meant someone had taken it intentionally and recently. And that's when I saw it. A single cork perched neatly on the shelf, placed vertically, not rolled, not dropped. Placed, like a calling card from someone who'd spent too long watching caper films. I took it up to Wolfe and handed it to him in silence. He examined it without touching, his nose crinkling. "Pine and trace of clove." "Not our cork," he muttered. "Someone recorked a different wine, inferior, intentionally." "And left this like a signature?" "No," Wolfe said. "Like a warning." I gave that some airtime. Wolfe didn't dramatize. If he said it was a warning, then someone was playing a game in his house and winning the first round. It got worse. Around noon, Saul Panzer called from Midtown. Not a coincidence. Saul doesn't do coincidence. He asked if Wolfe had recently given comment to Epicure and Vine or had sent me to interview anyone from their editorial team. I said no. And then Saul chuckled. "Well," he said, "someone claiming to be you showed up at the Bellhurst tasting yesterday. Told the host you were reviewing cellar practices for Wolfe's personal database. Apparently, you were particularly dismissive about their Rhone lineup. You also ordered a duck tartare to go. In your name?" I paused. I haven't had duck tartare since that stint in Paris, and I sure as hell didn't have it yesterday. Well, then you've been impersonated. Badly. They said your suit had no pocket square. That cinched it. I reported the details to Wolfe, who'd already shifted into high annoyance mode, the kind that involved tapping his chair arm once every 17 seconds. So, I said, someone impersonates Olivia, drops a fake review, then impersonates me, drops an insult, and lifts a $400 bottle from your cellar for kicks? Wolfe didn't answer. Instead, he closed his eyes. Someone, he said after a long silence, is staging a sequence. Olivia Harrow was not the beginning, nor will she be the end. Someone is cultivating a pattern. Quietly. Stylishly. Offensively. I glanced over. Stylishly, he nodded. They didn't choose the Barolo at random. They knew I'd paired it specifically. They recorked a mockery and left it to be found. The theater of it offends me more than the theft. There's a particular kind of mood Wolfe enters when the sanctity of his house is breached. It's not anger, not the yelling kind. It's something slower, like a glacier deciding to crush a village. That was the mood that spread through the office as Wolfe called Fritz back in. No one enters again, he told him. Lock the kitchen door, the garden path, the delivery slot, even the dumbwaiter. Fritz nodded with grim pride and vanished. Wolfe turned to me. Call Miss Harrow. Invite her to dinner. Tonight. Tonight. Can I ask why? Wolfe finally smiled. Just barely. Because our adversary intends to serve a second course. Let us appear hungry. I nodded. And if they try something again? He leaned back. Then they shall be fed their own pairing. Cold. There's a particular moment when a case changes from curiosity to calculation for Wolfe. That moment came precisely 12 minutes after Olivia Harrow arrived at the Brownstone for dinner and handed Wolfe a list of names. 4, to be exact. Not suspects per se, but rather, in her words, people who would gladly uncork my career and watch it breathe its last. I've seen hit lists with more subtlety. She sat at the dining table across from Wolfe, her tone dry, her napkin untouched. Wolfe had approved the menu himself. Duck à l'orange with potato soufflé, asparagus tips, and a Bordeaux from his collection, which Fritz opened in Wolfe's presence, with the cork destroyed immediately after. No accidents this time. The list sat between them, written in neat, almost surgical script. I leaned over to glance at it as I poured the wine. Lionel Birch, restaurateur and wine sponsor, Clive Fallow, rival critic at Bottle and Table. Nissa DeMay, former assistant, aspiring sommelier Cedric Houle, event planner with wine industry ties. Wolfe dabbed at his mouth and spoke without looking up. Let us begin with the least offensive of the quartet. Olivia tilted her head. Offensive? In odor, Wolfe replied. Their offense to reason will emerge in due course. I knew what that meant. It was time to call in favors, shake some trees, and see what dropped. After dinner, I took the names and headed for my desk while Wolfe retreated to the plant room with his postprandial beer. He didn't need to say it. He wanted updates by morning. So I did what I do best, made phone calls, ran some background, and called in a favor or two from people who still owed me drink tabs or romantic escapes. First, up. Lionel Birch, the restaurateur Olivia had supposedly reviewed. A big man with a bigger reputation, Birch ran La Cave du Nord, an elite midtown boîte where waiters wore gloves and wine lists came on embossed leather. According to the manager I reached, Birch was incensed about the review Olivia wrote, which shredded his prized lamb dish and mocked his pairing of a Syrah with a cassoulet. Olivia claimed she never attended that event. Oddly, Birch had no recollection of seeing her there either. He just assumed she slipped in late or kept to herself. Which made me wonder, if he didn't see her, why did he believe she wrote it? Second, Clive Fallow, whose name I didn't recognize, but whose writing I did. He had a signature habit of comparing every wine to failed romances. Merlot reminded him of disappointed Sunday mornings, and Chablis of a well-intentioned apology. He was known for high drama and low tolerance. His column in Bottle and Table ran side by side with Olivia's in competing publications. I called his office and got his assistant, who claimed Clive was unreachable until his Zinfandel cleanse was complete. Translation. He was hiding. That made me more interested, not less. Third, Nisa Demey, the former assistant. She'd worked under Olivia for 2 years, then quit to launch a boutique wine consultancy that fizzled 6 months later. She now worked front of house at a trendy pop-up in Soho where cocktails were served in teapots and the wine list was scribbled on mirrors. I rang the joint and got Nissa herself. Her voice clipped, cheerful, and absolutely fake. She said she had nothing but love for Olivia, then slipped and mentioned the Birch Review. That was wild, she said, the way she savaged that Syra. Bold move. I asked her when she read it. Couple of days ago. Interesting. The piece had been taken down within 24 hours. Someone was passing it around. Fourth, Cedric Hull, the odd one out. Not a critic, not a chef, not even a sommelier. An event planner, but not just any event planner. He curated tasting experiences for the elite, including wine flights on yachts and pairing menus for hedge fund weddings. I found a photo of him in a tuxedo holding a glass of Chianti and a clipboard. He'd worked with Olivia once, just once, on a benefit dinner where she'd overruled his visual aesthetic by insisting the wine glasses not be cobalt blue. He hadn't spoken to her since. When I reached him, he was civil but dry. Miss Harrow has strong opinions. I have taste. Sometimes they differ. When I laid it all out for Wolfe later that night, he didn't speak for nearly a minute. That's about 2 years in Wolfe time. You noted, he said finally, that Miss Demey referred to the Birch Review casually. She sure did. But Olivia claims the piece was pulled. Quickly. Right, within hours. Then who preserved it? I raised an eyebrow. Someone who needed it for something. Wolfe nodded. More precisely, someone who intended to circulate it, to plant it. The implication was clear. Whoever faked the review hadn't just posted it. They'd shared it, referenced it, and made sure the right people saw it. This wasn't just a prank. This was reputation sabotage with a corkscrew twist. But why frame Olivia? I asked. She's not a billionaire. She's not a threat to national security. She writes about fermented grapes. Exactly, Wolfe said. That is her world. That is where the stakes lie. Reputation, palate, power. He paused. Someone is maneuvering to reposition themselves, and Miss Harrow is in the way. I exhaled. So we've got 4 names. A restaurateur with a bruised ego, a critic with literary constipation, a failed assistant, and a petty event planner. And, Wolfe said, a stolen bottle of Barolo in my own cellar. You think one of them did that too? I think, he said, that someone is tying knots in our perception. We must begin untangling. I looked at him. Where do we start? Wolfe gestured toward the globe, which he often used as a prop for thought rather than navigation. You will invite each of them separately. Say Wolfe requests an interview regarding a column on authenticity in wine culture. Do not mention Olivia Harrow. Do not mention the cellar. I want to watch them deny before they know what they're denying. And if they ask what it's really about, you may tell them, he said with the faintest smirk, that Mr. Wolfe is pairing personalities. My assignments from Wolfe vary. Sometimes I'm playing muscle with a smile. Sometimes I'm shadowing socialites in designer coats. And sometimes, like now, I'm faking interest in wine culture so convincingly I could host a podcast on it. Wolfe's instructions were clear. Don't mention Olivia Harrow, don't mention the missing Barolo, and don't press too hard. Just let the suspects talk. People reveal more when they think the stakes are low. I started with Cedric Hull, the aesthetic tyrant of New York's high-end wine events. He agreed to meet me at a rooftop lounge in Tribeca that had the kind of wine list written entirely in cursive, and waiters who whispered like they were in a church. Cedric was tall, reed-thin, with hair that belonged in a shampoo commercial and shoes I wouldn't trust on gravel. He extended a manicured hand and greeted me with the kind of politeness that should come with hazard pay. "I understand you're working on a profile?" he asked, sliding into a seat upholstered in calfskin. "On authenticity in wine culture," I said. "Nero Wolfe is assembling a few voices for a piece on trends, pairings, preferences, that sort of thing." Cedric nodded solemnly. "It's long overdue. The current climate has been absolutely suffocated by what I call aggressive nostalgia. Everyone wants rustic, old-world, unfiltered, as if bad lighting makes wine more profound." "Interesting," I said. "You've worked with critics before?" He waved a hand. "Of course. They come to my events. Some behave, some pretend to be invisible, and then there are those who walk in and think they're entitled to correct the color of the linens. That ever happen with Miss Harrow? A flash of something, tightness in the jaw, a flicker behind the eyes. Once, she insisted I replace every cobalt blue stemware set with clear crystal. Said the tint affected how the wine presented. Imagine I did. And I imagined it annoyed him more than he was letting on. "So you two didn't work together again?" He sipped something pale and sparkling. "One does not reinvite criticism, especially when it comes disguised as taste." As I left, he smiled with his teeth but not his eyes. Wolfe was right. Cedric Hull resented her, and he didn't deny knowing about the Birch fiasco either. He even mentioned the review before I brought it up. "Bold of her, really," he'd said, "to risk everything over one lamb dish." Next, I stopped in at La Cave du Nord, where Lionel Birch held court in a glass-paneled office overlooking the kitchen. He was a big man in a tight suit, with the expression of someone who expected you to applaud his silence. When I introduced myself and mentioned Wolfe's interest in wine discourse, he grunted and motioned me inside. "I know who Wolfe is," he said, "and I know Harrow sent you." "She didn't," I replied. "In fact, she's not mentioned in the piece." "Then you're wasting time," he snapped. "She cost me a sponsor. That review was poison. You ever tried to replace a Napa Vintner's funding in 2 days?" "I read the review," I lied. "Brutal. She said my Syrah tasted like chalk and regret." "Did she?" He paused. "I assume so. Her name was on it, and it's the kind of thing she'd say. She's been gunning for me since I corrected her pronunciation of Pauillac at a gala 3 years ago." That explained his motive, sure, but he never confirmed seeing her at the dinner. And when I pressed lightly, "Did she take any notes?" "Seemed quiet," he faltered. "I didn't speak to her," he admitted. "I don't recall seeing her, but she was probably there." That's when the inconsistencies started stacking. Birch was mad, but his anger relied entirely on that review being genuine. He hadn't spoken to Olivia, hadn't seen her, and yet believed the worst. Clive Fallow was next. I found him at his regular haunt, a wine bar in the East Village that thought dim lighting was a personality trait. Clive looked like a jazz poet who'd lost his saxophone in a bet. Thick-rimmed glasses, a scarf too dramatic for spring, and the smirk of someone who overuses metaphors on purpose. He was mid-argument with the bartender when I arrived. I said 2015. "Not 2016, he barked. "There's a bitterness in the 16 that belongs in a custody battle, not a glass." When I introduced myself, he shifted to charm. "Ah, Nero Wolfe's man. Come to talk about authenticity. Marvelous, there's none left. Any recent examples?" "Oh, take that Harrow debacle. A review so brutal it practically filed for assault charges. Then she retracted it? Spineless or tactical? Hard to tell. She retracted it. Didn't she? The piece vanished. That usually means someone realized they went too far. Or someone didn't write it at all. He didn't ask how I knew about it, which told me he knew I knew, which meant the review had become currency in their circles. Olivia's name had value, just not to her. I wrapped up quickly, not wanting to hear another whine described as like kissing an ex you don't miss. Last stop, Nissa DeMay, the former assistant-turned-reluctant barmaid. Her pop-up bar in Soho had all the charm of a Pinterest board come to life. Chalkboard walls, string lights, potted herbs on the tables. She greeted me in an apron and blazer, smiled like someone managing 3 levels of stress, and sat with me for exactly 11 minutes between table checks. "Nero Wolfe," she said. "Never met him, but I've read about the orchids. He's more into wine than you'd think." She laughed. "Aren't we all?" I shifted gears. "You used to work with Olivia Harrow." 2 years, learned everything I know about what not to say in a tasting room. Ouch. She's brilliant, but she steamrolls. Not everyone wants to be told they're wrong about Pinot Noir at their own engagement party. That was a detail Wolfe would love. I kept her talking. She and Lionel. Constant tension. She and Clive. Please. She edited one of his columns once, and he started referring to her as the editor who drinks. And Cedric? She made him switch out all the glassware at a 6-figure dinner. She has enemies. But not you. Nissa smiled, sharp. She taught me how to survive this world. But maybe she never taught herself. When I got back to the brownstone and gave Wolfe the highlights, he didn't move, didn't blink, just sat and absorbed. "None of them denied the review," I said. They all took it as fact. But only Olivia insists she didn't write it. "Miss Harrow is telling the truth," Wolfe said flatly. Her protest was not defensive, it was wounded, and the detail of the note she received, "Don't correct the poor," is something none of these 4 would have known unless they were present at the dinner in question. "So you're saying one of them was at the private dinner where she corrected the sommelier?" "Exactly. One of them was close enough to know her language, her tone, and her pattern. And one of them planted that review to discredit her, using details no stranger could fake." "So who?" "Let us not presume," Wolfe said, standing, a rare event, and ringing for Fritz. "We must observe. I shall invite them to my office for a discussion on authenticity and criticism, and when the wine is poured—" He didn't finish. He didn't have to. It happened at 2:43 p.m. on a Thursday. That's not guesswork. I had just finished logging receipts for Wolfe's imported cheeses, and Fritz had started his ritual afternoon stock rotation in the pantry. Precision runs the brownstone, even when sabotage slinks in wearing velvet gloves. Wolfe was in the plant room, and I was halfway through a bottle of seltzer when Fritz knocked lightly at the office door, his face a mix of confusion and offense. "There is a bottle," he said, holding out a small parcel wrapped in dark blue cloth. "It was left on the service shelf outside the kitchen, where the butcher delivers. But this was not ordered." I took it from him and unwrapped the cloth. Inside was a 2006 Giacomo Conterno Barolo. The Barolo, the one that had vanished from Wolfe's cellar 3 days ago, intact, sealed, with a waxed neck and the original label untouched. Not a scratch. Like someone had never opened it, never moved it, just plucked it from a hidden nook in time and returned it as if they were ashamed to have borrowed it in the first place. But this wasn't restitution. This was insult. I brought it directly to Wolfe, who had just returned to the office with damp fingers from the orchids and an expression that read, "Do not speak unless you're holding something unusual." So I held out the bottle. He didn't take it. He simply stared, then let out a sound that I can only describe as a slow exhale shaped like disdain. "They are trying to reset the board," he said. "You're sure it's the same one?" I'm sure no one else in this city, let alone this zip code, would return this particular vintage, in this exact wrapping, to this house, unless they were the one who removed it. He motioned to the desk. I set the bottle down gently. They are announcing their presence, he said. Why not just steal it and vanish? Because the theft was never about possession, it was a demonstration. The replacement is a taunt. Message received, then. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. Number message delivered. It remains for us to decipher it. This wasn't a crime in the conventional sense. No alarms, no broken windows, no fingerprints to dust or suspects to book. It was theater. Someone had entered Wolfe's sanctum, either physically or through manipulation, and toyed with his ritual. It wasn't the wine that mattered. It was what the wine meant: knowledge, control, taste, and returning it, perfectly wrapped, meant they were still one move ahead. At 4 o'clock sharp, Wolfe called a house meeting in the office. Fritz stood in the corner, stoic. Theodore, from upstairs, had been summoned too, his first visit downstairs in weeks. Saul Panzer was dialed in via the speaker on Wolfe's desk, though Saul preferred stakeouts to salon discussion. This is not merely intrusion, Wolfe began, as if he were addressing a war tribunal. It is orchestration. Someone rearranged the elements of our environment to mirror a crime and then corrected it, without fear. That is the most dangerous kind of offender, one who believes in their own precision. Should we call Kramer? I asked. No, Wolfe said, as if I'd suggested we invite a goat into the orchid room. There is no theft, no crime, merely trespass of a higher order. Fritz nodded grimly. Theodore looked vaguely offended that it wasn't about plants. And Olivia Harrow. Saul's voice crackled through. What does this mean for her? Wolfe paused. She remains the intended casualty. The returned bottle signals two things. One, that the party responsible regrets nothing, and two, that they are confident we are still at a disadvantage. Then we need to close that gap, I said. Wolfe looked at me with approval, which in his language was not instantly interrupting. He turned to me. You will examine the wine again, carefully. Note the seal. Check for any microscopic tampering. The presence of the original bottle is too convenient. Copycat? Possibly. Or a decoy. But it will tell us something. It must. While I examined the bottle under a magnifier, thank you, Wolfe's occasional crossword addiction for the purchase of that desk tool. Fritz rechecked the cellar. Nothing else was missing, and the cork placement from before was still undisturbed. Meaning the original theft had been a one-time incursion, a statement. And this reappearance? The reply. I ran my finger across the wax seal, clean, firm, no signs of tampering, but something was off, a faint indentation beneath the back label. I called Wolfe over. Feel that? I asked. He did. Deliberate, he muttered. Hidden micro tag. Number 2 primitive. Lift the label. I did. Slowly, carefully, using the edge of a sterilized letter opener. Underneath, printed in tiny calligraphic lettering on the bottle's glass, was one word. Corrected. That was it. No signature. No smear of ink. Just one word etched with the intent of mockery and dominance. Whoever did this wanted us to know they were precise. That they hadn't made a mistake. They had corrected one. The wine theft wasn't a crime. The original presence of the wine in Wolfe's cellar was, in their logic, an error. One they fixed. Wolfe stared at the word for a long time. They believe, he said slowly, that they understand me. My tastes, my symbols, my meanings. They believe they have matched me. That is their mistake. You're going to trap them. I'm going to correct them. The next move came that evening. Wolfe sent out 4 invitations, one to each of our suspects, carefully worded, hand-delivered. He invited them to a private tasting at the Brownstone. Said the topic was critical frameworks in postmodern wine evaluation. I told him no one would fall for that. They will, Wolfe said, because critics are incapable of resisting their own reflection. He wasn't wrong. Within 3 hours, all 4 RSVP'd. Yes, even Clive, even Cedric. And Wolfe made it clear, no +1s, no substitutions, no delay. Saturday, 6 p.m. sharp. Fritz naturally went on high alert. The table was reset twice, the cellar triple-checked, and Wolfe ordered a special floral arrangement for the office. Nothing but pale, white orchids, the same kind Olivia had referenced in one of her earliest reviews. Saturday would be the confrontation. Wolfe never laid traps with weapons. He used words, symbols, ideas. But before then, we still had one night left in which someone might try again. So I stayed awake, guarded the kitchen, watched the door, checked the windows, and at 2:16 a.m. I heard it. Not footsteps, just the soft clink of glass from the dumbwaiter shaft. Someone was still playing their game, only now we were watching. The sound was unmistakable, not loud, not dramatic, just precise. The kind of sound you hear only if you're waiting for it. A faint clink like 2 glass lips brushing. It came from the dumbwaiter shaft just outside the kitchen pantry. At 2:16 a.m., no one should have been anywhere near it. Certainly not with glass. I was in my robe, slippers, and a shirt I wouldn't want to be caught in if Wolfe died and the press arrived. But the noise pulled me straight up like a string, and within seconds I had my hand on the old brass crank of the dumbwaiter. Nothing moved. The little shelf inside the shaft was empty, and the pulley system was still. But the silence was telling. Too still. Too quickly. Someone had just used it, then locked it in place. I ran down to the basement, where the other end of the shaft terminates beside Fritz's emergency preserve shelf. The latch had been reset, and the door left barely ajar. Inside, a single empty wine glass. Clean. Dry. Stem untouched, and on the bowl of the glass, just above where someone might leave a lip print, was a tiny smudge of burgundy, barely visible, as though wiped hastily with a sleeve. I took it upstairs, holding it in a towel like evidence from a crime scene, and set it gently on Wolfe's desk. At 7:45 a.m., when Wolfe emerged, earlier than usual and already scowling, he saw the glass and stopped mid-scowl. "What is this?" he asked. "A courtesy," I said, "from our midnight guest." He examined it without touching it. "No print." "No print," I confirmed, "but a smudge. Same shape as the Bordeaux you served with Olivia's duck. Could be a second pour, could be symbolic." Wolfe didn't comment. He walked to his chair, sank into it, and stared at the glass as if it might confess. "What are they doing, Archie?" "Marking territory." "No," he muttered. "Not territory. Territory requires claim. This is an invitation. They want to be found. But on their terms. And if we don't, they'll escalate." And they did. That same morning, Saul Panzer called from Midtown again. His voice came through calm, clipped, but with that little edge I know means he's spooked. "I was following up on Clive Fallow," Saul said. "Did some checking on his recent submissions. Turns out the same IP address that uploaded the fake Olivia Harrow review also posted a comment under Clive's name on a private food forum 3 days earlier. Timing matches." "Wait," I said. "So Clive might have posted it himself." "That's what it looked like until this morning." "What changed?" "The forum admin flagged something. He remembered the IP address because the user had accessed the forum from a hotel Wi-Fi system. The hotel, the one where Cedric Hull was staying last week, a private suite, no registered guests, but a confirmed access log at 2:07 a.m. I paused. So either Cedric borrowed Clive's login and impersonated him, or someone impersonated both of them, from the same location, in which case we're not dealing with a personal vendetta. We're dealing with someone orchestrating a full rewrite of the narrative. Like a critic of critics. Exactly. I relayed it all to Wolfe, who by now had both eyes closed and fingers steepled, his version of spinning mental gears at high torque. We are no longer dealing with emotional sabotage, he said. We are confronting intellectual subversion. I'd argue the emotional part's still in play. Olivia looks like she aged 10 years in 3 days. She was the proof of concept, Wolfe said. Now the project moves forward. By noon, another piece landed on the board. A mysterious email arrived on Olivia's work account from an anonymous burner domain. The subject line, "You correct the poor, I correct the critic." No message body, just a PDF attachment with a mocked-up version of a headshot splashed across a fake Wine Logic article titled "The Hero Effect, Bias Masquerading as Taste." Whoever was behind this had put serious effort into the design. It looked like a real article. It even had footnotes, quotes, and a fictional byline. The intent wasn't just to prank. It was to discredit. Olivia forwarded it to me in a panic. "They're destroying me," she said on the phone. Quietly, elegantly. I haven't written anything in a week, and the silence feels louder than anything I've ever published. "They'll make a mistake," I told her. They haven't yet. Wolfe's solution, of course, wasn't emotional. It was strategic. He issued orders like a chess grandmaster cornering a bishop. Saul would acquire physical surveillance data from Cedric's hotel to verify logins and movements. I would contact the Wine Forum's admin directly and dig up registration logs for the fake Clive post. Fritz would prepare tasting menus for the Saturday confrontation, 4 wine flights, each subtly echoing something from our suspects' past choices. A little bait in each bottle. And Wolfe? Wolfe began writing. Not an article, not a letter, but notes. Character profiles, language patterns, phrasing tendencies. I saw the pad once when I passed his desk. At the top of one page, "Who sees Olivia as a mirror?" At the top of another, "Which one is correcting themselves, not her?" By Friday night, the pressure cooker was hissing. Olivia stayed silent, holed up in her apartment with blackout curtains and 2 unopened bottles of Malbec. Saul hadn't cracked the hotel logs yet. The Wine Forum logs were delayed. The suspects remained oblivious. But Wolfe, he was beginning to smell blood. That night he invited me into the office just past 11 o'clock. No orchids, no lectures, just one sentence. "They've already chosen Saturday to strike again. You're sure?" "I'm not certain of when," he said, "but I am certain of why. The wine glass in the dumbwaiter was not meant to mock me. It was meant to bait you. The return of the Barolo was not a correction. It was a false gift. We are being fed symbols, too many, too perfectly timed. They want to collapse the difference between perception and truth. So what do? We provide them," Wolfe said, "with a wine that cannot be corrected. A truth that cannot be rewritten." "Which means what?" "It means," he said, "we must serve our trap in a glass they cannot touch." At that point, I didn't have the foggiest what he meant, but Wolfe was already crafting his Saturday setup down to the thread count of the napkins. The tasting would go ahead. The suspects would attend. And Wolfe would not only reveal the identity of our manipulator, he would do it by proving they had no taste at all. Saturday arrived not with sunshine, but with the sort of grey ceiling that New Yorkers call weather, and Wolfe calls a meteorological nuisance. But it suited the tone of the day. By 5 p.m., the brownstone was tense in the way only Wolfe's brownstone can be when outsiders are about to enter. Fritz was dressed in his formal black apron, a napkin in one hand and a stainless steel tasting spoon in the other. Theodore had descended briefly to check the floral presentation. He said nothing but sniffed twice and vanished again. Saul hadn't checked in yet, but I knew he was watching from outside, probably in the borrowed florist van we parked 2 houses down. And Wolfe? Wolfe was calm. too calm. That meant he was ready. I straightened my tie in the mirror, double-checked the wine flight placements on Wolfe's office table, 4 identical glasses per guest, each labeled with a small white tag, and made sure the decanters were exactly where Wolfe specified. Then, at 5:59 p.m., the bell rang. Right on cue. First through the door was Clive Fallow, wearing a scarf that could have been a small curtain. "Ah, the infamous lair," he said, peering around like he expected the walls to be lined with judgmental sommeliers. He didn't remove his gloves. Next came Nissa de May, hair up in a bun, dressed like a restaurateur with bills to pay and no time for nonsense. She gave me a smile that was all cheekbone, then scanned the hallway for signs of traps. Lionel Birch followed, breathing hard like he'd climbed every step twice. He was in an ill-fitting navy suit that looked expensive enough to make a point, but not tailored enough to land it. And finally, Cedric Hull, late by 3 minutes, crisp by 30. He entered with a controlled gait, nodded toward Wolfe's voice from the office, and said, "Your man said there'd be wine." I arrived. Once they were settled in the office, Wolfe spoke from behind his desk, not rising, of course not, but seated like a monarch receiving petitioners. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "you're here because you hold influence over a peculiar domain. Taste. In a world where facts grow slippery and image drives commerce, what you say about wine matters more than what the wine is." No one interrupted. Wolfe gestured toward the wine trays. "Before you are 4 glasses. Each contains a wine of some notoriety. Your task is simple: taste, evaluate, and tell me which of the 4 is genuine. The others are forgeries." That got a reaction. Nissa blinked. Cedric leaned forward. Clive looked intrigued and insulted all at once. Birch scoffed. "You mean adulterated?" he asked. "No," Wolfe replied. "I mean counterfeit." I handed out pens and Wolfe's custom critique cards. Wolfe never misses a chance to over-engineer a trap, and stepped aside. One by one they began swirling, sipping, and scribbling. Wolfe watched them not like a host but like a hawk waiting to pounce. Each wine was a setup. Wolfe had designed the flight carefully, a Bordeaux that had been deliberately oxidized, then rebalanced with a touch of apple juice, a Napa Merlot cut with a cheap supermarket red, a Rioja that Wolfe himself had declared insipid on arrival and cellared only for punishment. And finally, the real deal, a 1998 Chateau Haut-Brion, pristine, unopened, and placed in glass, 4 for every guest. As they sipped and scribbled, Wolfe observed. I did too. Cedric sniffed everything twice but barely tasted. Birch drank heavily, then frowned at every glass. Clive made dramatic faces and used words like melancholic and wistful. Nissa was the only one who hesitated before glass 4 and tilted her head like she recognized something real. 10 minutes later, Wolfe collected the cards. He read them in silence, then stacked them in a single, neat pile. "Only one of you identified the genuine wine correctly," he said. "The rest either preferred counterfeits or offered evaluations so vague they could apply to hand soap." Birch grunted. "What does that prove?" "That some of you cannot tell quality from imitation," Wolfe replied. "And that one of you has built a world upon correcting others until you are corrected yourself." Cedric stood. "This is absurd." "No, Mr. Hull," Wolfe said, voice cold. "What is absurd is that someone used this very principle, taste and the authority behind it, to destroy a career." Everyone went silent. Wolfe continued. Miss Harrow was sabotaged. A review was published in her name, describing a dinner she did not attend, with details only someone present at a separate event could have known. A wine pairing she once corrected in private was referenced in a note only someone who heard her correction firsthand could have composed. Eyes shifted. And that same individual returned a stolen bottle of wine to this house, Wolfe said, gesturing to the conterno on his credenza. A bottle tampered with only to leave one word, corrected. He paused. No one spoke. Wolfe looked directly at Nyssa. You are the only one who identified the true wine, because you were trained well. Miss Harrow taught you. Nyssa nodded slowly. But you also had reason to resent her. Wolfe went on. Your consultancy failed. She refused to co-sign your press launch. And when you planned your first solo tasting event, she quietly told a sponsor you weren't ready. Nyssa said nothing. She didn't need to. You knew about the poor incident, Wolfe continued, because you were there, uninvited. You were shadowing her, learning. You heard her correction to the sommelier, and you filed it away. Cedric turned to Nyssa. You were there. That was supposed to be invite only. She was, Wolfe said. Invisible, as critics often are. Nyssa met Wolfe's eyes. Calm, no denial. I didn't destroy her, she said. I corrected the balance. Ah, Wolfe replied. So the same logic that just failed you in this tasting. You believe it applies to careers. I created a version of her that reflected what she taught me, Nyssa said, and the world believed it. That says more about her than it does about me. No, Wolfe said. It says everything about you. The room stayed still. Then Wolfe gestured to me. Archie, I nodded. Already called Saul. He's waiting with a statement ready, and Olivia's lawyer has the IP logs. She'll be cleared by Monday. Nyssa stood. She didn't beg, didn't yell, just straightened her blazer and left the room like she was late for brunch. When the others filtered out, Clive muttered something about vindictive women. Birch avoided eye contact, and Cedric looked oddly impressed. I locked the door after them and turned to Wolfe. You knew it was her before the tasting. I suspected, but only someone convinced of their own correction would sabotage the flavor of another. The wine told the truth. They always do. Fritz appeared in the doorway. Shall I bring dinner? Wolfe sighed deeply. Yes, and not a drop of Bordeaux. As he reached for his beer, I said, So what now? Wolfe closed his eyes. Now, he said, we eat. And then I uncorked something without commentary. Sunday morning at the Brownstone usually smells like Fritz's cinnamon rolls and sounds like silence, except for the rustling of Wolfe's newspaper and the occasional grunt when an editorial dares use the word nuance improperly. But that morning, everything had shifted. Wolfe had done the unthinkable. He had postponed breakfast by 45 minutes and ordered the dining room untouched. Instead, he had everyone summoned once more to his office. Not for tasting, not for pretense. This was it. I brought in the chairs, placed them in a semicircle, and made sure Wolfe had his beer, the wine bottle in question, and a single sheet of yellow legal pad notes. He hadn't spoken a full sentence to me since Nyssa left the day before, though he had nodded approvingly at dinner when Fritz served braised rabbit. By 9 a.m., they were all there. All three remaining suspects. No Nyssa. She was already under wraps, as per Saul's quiet extraction and Olivia's attorney's request. Wolfe had made it clear we wouldn't see her again, not until the paperwork was filed. Lionel Birch arrived first, clearly annoyed, tugging at the sleeves of a poorly ironed jacket. He looked around the room like he was expecting a trap door under his chair. Clive Fallow followed, scarf thinner but still obnoxious, and immediately helped himself to a glass of water without asking. Cedric Hull came last, this time without the polish. Tie crooked, cuff wrinkled, as though Saturday's exposure had pulled something loose in his careful arrangement. Wolfe didn't rise, of course. He rarely does. But when he began to speak, the tone made everyone sit up straighter. You are here, Wolfe said, not to witness a confession, but to understand how the truth was revealed, through your own reactions, through wine, and through the flaws that character cannot cork. Clive raised a hand, half smirking. Is this going to be an ethics lecture? Because I charge for those." Wolfe ignored him. When the bottle was taken from my cellar, the act was surgical. No disturbance, no trace. When it returned, it bore a message. Corrected. And yet the wine had not been consumed. That told me the thief valued symbolism over indulgence. He looked directly at Cedric. "You're a man of symbols, Mr. Hull. Glass color, light angles, aesthetic overlays. But the theft was not yours." Cedric tilted his head. "Generous of you." Wolfe continued. "Clive, your language is flamboyant, but your insecurities are louder. You depend on recognition. Had you engineered this plot, you would have left a signature, a flourish, a sarcastic annotation." Clive shrugged, half in agreement. "Which brings us to Miss DeMay," Wolfe said, gesturing to the empty fourth chair. She was quiet, precise, trained by Miss Harrow in both taste and restraint. She did not frame Olivia with noise, but with accuracy. She recreated Olivia's style so precisely that none of you questioned the review. Not even you, Mr. Birch, though you never saw her at the dinner. Birch grunted. "It read like her. That's all I needed." "Exactly," Wolfe said. "Miss DeMay wanted it to read like her. That was the art, and the cruelty." There was a long pause. Clive folded his arms. Cedric looked away. Birch glared down at his shoes like they owed him an apology. Wolfe reached for the Barolo, set it upright. This bottle was not simply returned. It was placed. It was meant to unsettle, to reverse the power dynamic in this house. But it did the opposite. It clarified motive. He turned to me. "Archie." I handed him the second glass, the one from the dumbwaiter, still untouched. "This glass," Wolfe said, "was meant to be found. It was planted not as a clue, but as a warning. And yet the wine inside was residue from the same Bordeaux served to Miss Harrow. Not identical, but from the same bottle. That meant the one who planted it had taken a sample during the dinner, which, of course, only one person besides Fritz and myself could have done." He gestured again to the empty chair. "Nissa DeMay. She arrived early. She left late. She helped clear the glasses and delivered the decanters to Fritz. In the chaos of our carefully orchestrated gathering, she re-entered the house after hours and placed this in the dumbwaiter shaft, knowing that Archie would be on watch. I sleep lightly," I muttered. "Guiltier people should too." Wolfe turned toward the others. What Miss DeMay sought was not money, nor fame, nor even revenge. She wanted redirection. She had failed in the wine world on her own terms, but as a ghostwriter, a mimic, a hidden voice, she could dominate. She was not merely correcting Olivia. She was trying to replace her. "Ridiculous," Clive muttered. "That's not how it works." "Of course not," Wolfe said. "But it's how she thought it worked." Cedric leaned forward. "You said she recreated Olivia's voice. What gave her away?" Wolfe's lips twitched, half smile, half snarl. "She referenced a dish Olivia never reviewed, the bouillabaisse grenoblois. Olivia had once declared that the inclusion of saffron in that dish was culinary vandalism. The fake review praised it, subtly, ironically, but I caught it." "So that was it?" Birch asked. "A spice?" "No," Wolfe said. "It was ego. She wanted to slip in her opinion under Olivia's mask. She couldn't resist making one small correction." There was silence then. No one asked more, because they knew. Wolfe picked up the Barolo, opened it himself. Slowly, with the precision of a man slicing through lies. Then he poured a single glass and set it on the desk. "Miss Harrow will return to print," he said, "and her palate will remain, her own. As for the rest of you, remember this. The next time you taste wine, do not confuse bitterness for depth." I escorted them out. None of them said goodbye. By the time I returned to the office, Wolfe was already back in his chair, sipping his beer and flipping open his book of ancient Roman cuisine. "You think she'll try again?" I asked. "Nyssa. Number her ambition has soured, and she miscalculated. That kind of arrogance does not age well." "And what about wine culture?" I said, smirking. "Still trust it?" He sipped his beer. "Wine is honest. People are not." Fritz entered with breakfast at last. Duck eggs, roasted potatoes, and one perfectly toasted croissant. Wolfe glanced at the plate and raised a brow. "No cinnamon roll." Fritz smiled faintly. "Corrected." Wolfe grunted. And just like that, order returned to the brownstone. There's something unsettling about calm after conflict, especially when that calm is artificial, like linen napkins on a battlefield. The brownstone had returned to its usual rhythm. Fritz humming quietly in the kitchen, Theodore tending orchids with monastic focus, Wolfe devouring a mountain of veal with mustard glaze while pretending not to enjoy it. And me? I was waiting for the final piece. Because no matter how airtight Wolfe's reasoning seemed, and believe me, it usually is, I knew he hadn't delivered the full reveal yet. That came Monday morning. Olivia Harrow arrived promptly at 10, by invitation. Wolfe asked her to come alone, and she did, looking sharper than she had a week ago. The stress lines were still there, but she was dressed to reclaim her place, in a tailored coat and a silk blouse that said she was back in control. She sat without hesitation in the red chair facing Wolfe's desk, her posture composed but alert. The type of person who now expected sabotage at every turn. "You said you had something for me," she said. "I have several things," Wolfe replied. "But most importantly, I have clarity." She nodded once. "I'm listening." I sat in the corner, notepad open but unused. Wolfe didn't look at either of us directly. His eyes were on the decanter beside him. "The individual who mimicked your review was not merely sabotaging your career. She was running a test," Wolfe said. "A test of perception, influence, and authorship. If her forgery had passed unnoticed, you would have been replaced, not just in the public eye, but in the trade itself." "She wanted to be me," Olivia said flatly. She wanted to be better than you, while using your skin as a costume. That is the greater insult." Olivia looked down, not embarrassed, reflective. "And you're certain it was Nyssa?" Wolfe's tone didn't shift. "Yes. Not only did she possess the stylistic access, she knew intimate details, your phrasing, your palate, and your rhythm. But most critically, she made a mistake. She allowed herself an indulgence." He reached to the side and retrieved the printed fake review, the one that had started it all. In the final paragraph, Wolfe continued, the impersonator referenced a specific pairing, a Sancerre with bone marrow toast, a bold resurrection of minerality amid soft decay. "That line is not yours." Olivia's eyes narrowed. "It sounds like mine." "Precisely," Wolfe said. "That's the trap. But you never use resurrection to describe minerality. You use it exclusively in relation to spice, particularly cloves." She blinked, then she smiled faintly. "That's true. It was her attempt at elevation. She could copy your style, but not your sensibility." "And the wine?" Wolfe gestured to the conterno. The stolen Barolo returned untouched, physically, yes, but marked, etched with the word corrected. "That was not meant for you. That was for me." Olivia frowned. "Why?" "Because the one thing that unites all critics," Wolfe said, "is their fear of being critiqued. She wanted me to flinch, to see that she had pierced my perimeter and left a message." I leaned forward. "And you didn't flinch?" "Of course not," Wolfe said. "I drink beer." That got a smile out of Olivia. A real one. "And the dumbwaiter?" she asked. That was bait for Archie. She assumed, correctly, that he would hear the noise, that he would report it, that I would begin to suspect something new. But what she didn't anticipate was the overkill. Critics know restraint, but saboteurs always overplay. Olivia shook her head. She was always observant. Quiet. I never thought she resented me. She didn't, Wolfe replied. Not until you refused to endorse her consultancy. That was the wound. The rest was method. I added, she knew she wasn't ready, but she needed you to say it, and when you didn't, she rewrote the story. Olivia looked away. Wolfe waited. Then he reached into a drawer and pulled out a slim folder. I've instructed Mr. Goodwin to share the technical findings with your counsel. The IP matches, the handwriting on the envelope, the re-entry timestamp at the brownstone. Miss DeMay was thorough, but not invisible. And the others? Olivia asked. Cedric, Clive, Lionel. Clowns, Wolfe muttered. They consume the false review like dessert. Cedric marveled at the structure. Clive quoted it in passing. And Birch, well, he lacks the palate to recognize authenticity, even in his own kitchen. They won't be punished. Not by the law, but by the court of their own irrelevance, yes. Your absence made them bold. Your return will make them cautious. Olivia exhaled. And Nisa? She has been offered a private settlement. She's agreed to issue a formal apology under seal, retract all correspondence, and sign a permanent ban from editorial publishing under any pseudonym. And if she refuses? Wolfe looked up finally, meeting Olivia's gaze. She won't. Her appetite exceeded her capacity. She's learned that imitation is not a form of flattery. It's a confession of inadequacy. There was silence for a moment, the kind that marks the end of a long, bitter meal. Thank you, Mr. Wolfe, Olivia said, standing. He inclined his head. Nothing more. She turned to me. And you, Archie, for not blinking when I said my reputation had been hijacked. I've worked with enough egos, I said. Yours was the only one that didn't talk too much. She gave me a look I couldn't quite define. Half smile, half sadness, and then she was gone. Wolfe turned to me after the door closed. You see, Archie, the real crime wasn't the review. It wasn't the theft. It was the attempt to erase someone while pretending to celebrate them. That's not wine, I said. That's politics. It's both, Wolfe replied. Wine is culture, and culture is always political. I collected the glass, the folder, and the review printout. Wolfe leaned back in his chair and sighed deeply. I require a new bottle, he said. Preferably one without fingerprints, metaphorical or otherwise. Fritz has a 92 Rioja chilling. Wolfe frowned. Too pedestrian. There's a Gewürztraminer. Archie, Wolfe interrupted. Do not correct the poor. I nodded. You got it. You'd think that once a mystery gets solved, there's a sense of closure. A click. A final piece sliding into place. But when it comes to Nero Wolfe, the conclusion doesn't snap. It settles. Like dust after a storm or the last swirl of sediment in an empty glass. And that Monday evening, with the guests gone, the papers filed, and Miss Harrow's dignity officially rebottled and corked, the brownstone returned to its natural state, orderly, insulated, and aromatic with thyme and veal stock. It should have been over. But Wolfe was still restless. Not pacing, of course. He'd rather die. But thinking. He sat in his oversized chair by the Globe, a new book in his lap that he hadn't turned a page in for 20 minutes. I knew the signs. He wasn't content, not because of legal loose ends. Those were Saul's department. But because something hadn't tasted right to him, not metaphorically, literally. You're brooding, I said, not looking up from the ledger I was updating. I am ruminating, Wolfe corrected. Same thing, just sounds smarter, he grunted. Do you know what bothers me, Archie? Let me guess, wine fraud, lazy adjectives in food writing, or the fact that Olivia Harrow called Gewürztraminer a charming mistake. He blinked slowly. All tolerable. What disturbs me is that Miss de May did not drink the wine she sabotaged. I paused. He continued. When she planted the dumbwaiter glass, she used the same bottle as served to Miss Harrow, but she poured it, wiped it, and placed it without tasting it. The smudge was sleeve-based, not lip-based. So, he said, Miss de May never once risked confronting her own imitation. She recreated Olivia's palate without applying it to her own tongue. I closed the ledger. You mean she couldn't face the comparison? Worse, he said. She believed it unnecessary. That tells me her ambition wasn't taste. It was control. We sat in silence for a while after that. Wolfe returned to his book. I returned, pretending I had something left to file. The brownstone was quiet, peaceful even. But I could feel the shift in Wolfe's posture, an invisible signal that something, however small, remained unfinished. At 8:30, Fritz brought dinner. Grilled guinea hen with fennel, orange glaze, and wild rice. Wolfe sniffed it approvingly and selected a modest Beaujolais from his private stash. He poured 2 glasses, and for once didn't complain when I sloshed mine like a dockhand. Halfway through the meal, the phone rang. I beat Fritz to it and answered. Goodwin. This is Saul. His tone was dry. I thought you might want to know. Nyssa tried to make a quiet call from her holding location. Guess who she contacted? Clive, I guessed. Nope. Cedric Hull, I blinked. Why him? Don't know yet. But here's the kicker. She didn't say a word, just sent him a photo. Of what? A wine list. That got Wolfe's attention. I covered the receiver. Nyssa sent Cedric a photo of a wine list. Wolfe exhaled, long and slow. Describe it. I asked Saul to forward the image to my line. A few seconds later, it came through. I opened the file on Wolfe's office monitor. A single-page menu, typed, black on cream. Wolfe stared at it in silence. It's a tasting menu from last month, he said. Recognize it? Of course. It's from the private event where Olivia corrected the sommelier, the one Nyssa attended uninvited. So she's sending Cedric a reminder? No. Wolfe shook his head. She's telling him something, that he was there too. That stopped me cold. What? Wolfe steepled his fingers. I should have seen it. Cedric Hull, the aesthetic purist, the man who never forgets a place setting. He coordinated that entire event. He wasn't just involved, he curated the experience, and he's the one who selected the pairing that Olivia corrected. I leaned forward. You think he helped Nyssa? I think he recruited her. I paced the office. So it wasn't a solo act. Nyssa impersonated. Cedric coordinated. He had the connections, the platform, the access. She had the talent. Wolfe nodded. A joint operation with different motives. Nyssa wanted revenge. Cedric wanted vindication. When Olivia corrected his pairing, she undermined his authority, publicly, in front of potential sponsors. It's the worst insult he could suffer. And the fake review. Wolfe's voice lowered. Was Cedric's idea. But Nyssa wrote it. She made it believable. She made it sting, and he published it using her access. And the wine theft? Wolfe considered. Likely his. Nyssa couldn't have slipped into the brownstone undetected, but Cedric, during his first visit, while you were escorting Clive and Lionel out. Possible. So why would Nyssa send him the menu now? To remind him he owes her. Or to warn him. I nodded slowly. So what do we do? Wolfe looked at the clock. Nothing. Nothing? Let them unravel. The alliance was built on flattery and fear. Cedric now knows Nyssa could expose him at any time. She knows he's the one with deeper pockets. They are no longer partners. They are threats to each other. I frowned. So we just watch? We let the flavors develop. The next day we did get a call from Olivia. She'd received an anonymous package on her doorstep. Inside, a bottle of budget Syrah and a typed note that read, "Some pairings can't be corrected." No name, no return address. Wolfe read the message and smirked. "Petty," he said. "But poetic," I added. He didn't disagree. As the week wore on, things returned to normal. Olivia published her next column on the ethics of blind tastings. Cedric vanished from public appearances. Clive pivoted to writing about beer. Lionel Birch issued a press release claiming he was stepping back to focus on legacy dishes, which I interpreted as hiding. And Nisa, well, last I heard, she'd relocated to Portland. Wolfe said it was fitting. "A city where confusion is mistaken for creativity," he declared. That Thursday night, over roast duck and a quiet Riesling, Wolfe lifted his glass and muttered, "Not all crimes are bitter. Some are just badly aged." I raised mine. "And some people aren't corked, they're cracked." He gave a grunt that might have been a laugh. Hard to tell. As I cleared the plates, he added one more thing, almost as an afterthought. "Archie?" "Yeah?" "Next time someone tampers with the wine, let them try Fritz's chili. Then we'll see how well they correct that." I nodded. Justice, Wolfe style, served hot. 3 weeks later, life at the Brownstone had fully returned to its equilibrium, which is to say, nothing new had entered, nothing irreplaceable had been lost, and Fritz's soufflés had regained their loft. The orchids resumed their daily inspection, Wolfe resumed his war against verbs in modern journalism, and I resumed pretending that collecting Wolfe's dry cleaning was somehow part of a noble investigative tradition. The case of Olivia Harrow, the Barolo, and the forged review had been, in Wolfe's words, an aesthetic insult disguised as an intellectual exercise. That was his way of saying it irritated him more than murder. He never liked being used as a stage prop in someone else's drama, and Nisa de May had tried to make him the audience, not the judge. But in the end, it wasn't the clever mimicry that brought her down. It wasn't even the digital trail, though Saul's log work had been airtight. No, the thing that ended her was the same thing that had started her downfall, the assumption that taste was style and that control was evidence of superiority. She forgot that Nero Wolfe's idea of control wasn't volume or exposure, it was precision. After Cedric Hull quietly sold his stake in a boutique pairing startup and slipped out of the city to consult in Napa, Red, Hyde, Wolfe wrote one letter, one paragraph, sent it to the Epicure and Vine board anonymously. It simply said, "A glass poured in arrogance leaves a residue that never rinses away." A week later, Olivia Harrow's full column slot was reinstated. Clive's column was pushed to a bi-weekly blog post. Cedric's name was scrubbed from 3 menus. And Nissa. She didn't reappear, at least not under her own name. Wolfe had ensured that much by including her handwriting sample in the case packet, filed discreetly with the publishing watchdog group. They wouldn't hunt her, but she couldn't hide among the pages again. As for Wolfe, he never mentioned her again by name. One evening, over a mild cassoulet and a modest Brunello, I asked him if he'd missed the thrill of more dangerous cases, ones with knives, not corks. He tilted his head, considered it, and said, "Murder is crude. Sabotage is delicate. One leaves a body, the other leaves a bruise. Which do you prefer?" He sipped his wine. "Neither, but one offers better wine afterward." I didn't push. Later that night, I found an envelope tucked under my office blotter. No stamp, no seal. Inside, a clipping from the Harrow Standard. Olivia's latest column. She'd written about integrity, about how real taste comes from restraint, and how imitation is a form of fear. No note, just her signature and fountain pen at the bottom. I left it on Wolfe's desk the next morning. He didn't mention it, but he didn't throw it away either. And that was enough. Because some pairings you don't correct. You just let them breathe,